Dear panelists and guests, I want you all a warm welcome to the second edition of Point Talks. Point Talks is a new alternative online format of our traditional Point conference. As most of you probably already know, Point is a conference that is traditionally being organized by Citizens Association Why Not for the last 10 years. And in the last year, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, for the first time, we were forced to cancel or postpone our conference, and we come up with the solution that we hope it will be as interesting as our traditional Point conference. As I said, this is the second edition of the Point Talks, and the Point Talks is a series of discussions and panel discussions on the topics that are usually being covered on the Point conference. For start, let me introduce our today's panelists. Our today's topic is the elections in Bosnia and Herzegovina that were held in November and December in the city of Mostar. And today we will discuss various aspects of the election process, but also disinformation that affect the election and the public opinion during the election process. So today with us, we have representatives from the Central Election Commission in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ms. Irena Hadžiabdić. Also, we have a representative of the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, Ms. Reppell. Also, we have representatives of various civil society organizations that are engaged in monitoring the election process. So we have Ivana Korajlić from Transparency International in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also today with us is Dario Jovanović from the Coalition Pod Lupom, Coalition for Free and Fair Elections. And my dear colleague Danira Karović from the Citizen Association Why Not, who is working on the Truth-o-meter and Vote-o-meter projects, as well as the Openness Index, but she will talk about those things later. So my name is Emir Zulejhić, and I am working with CA Why Not, and I am the editor of our media fact-checking website called Raskrinkavanje.ba. Okay, so as I said, today here we have a representative from the Election Commission, which is the institution in charge of conducting and implementing the elections in our country. So my first question would go for Ms. Hadžiabdić. I want to know, how did the pandemic affect the implementation of the election in our country? What was different from the previous elections? And did the postponement of the elections had anything to do with the pandemic, or it is exclusively connected with the non-adaptation of the budget of our country?
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be a part of this panel. And I would like to respond immediately that actually both pandemic and the lack of budget affected implementation of the elections, local elections 2020. And I can say that these elections were extremely challenging. First of all, when we announced elections in the beginning of May, we were still in the state of natural disaster caused by pandemic of COVID-19. And this disaster and not big freedom of movement ended at the end of May. And the fact that we didn't get the budget till July, and the budget for elections we usually get in January, that means that actually all this election preparation that is usually done in 6 to 8 months. For these local elections, we actually had only 3 months to prepare elections. And we had additional problem that no one planned that we will need protective equipment as disinfection and for pandemic. So no one planned it in a budget. When we even got budget, municipalities also, when they responded, no one planned it. So it was a big risk how we will actually have election implementation in this context. Additional problem was that we had to actually give voting rights to the people who are or positive on COVID-19 or who are in isolation. So we planned in our election administration special rules for them. And it is so difficult when you plan something that you don't know how it will work in practice. It happened that several times we try to adapt last-minute changes in order to organize it better. So we allow these voters to apply even on election day if they have the proper documentation that they're positive or if they're in isolation. And I can give you some numbers that actually more than 7,700 voters applied to vote as COVID positive in isolation. And out of that, 683 didn't exercise their voting rights. So almost 8% in 50 municipalities. Why they didn't manage to exercise their voting rights? They were visited by special mobile teams on election day. And it happens that some of them were not found on their address. Some of them didn't feel well. Some of them, in the meantime, ended in hospital. So it was just a waste of time for special mobile teams. Some of them didn't have proper assistance to vote that they needed. Some of them didn't have valid ID documents. At the end, it happened that due to fragmented territory, 200 people were too far to be visited during these voting hours that actually were ended at 7 o'clock. So did we fail? I don't think we failed. We did as much as we could, but this system doesn't work properly. So I hope that we won't be again in position to actually plan elections in difficult circumstances like this as a pandemic. But if it happens, we have to do it better based on our lessons learned.
Thank you for your insight. As I said, we also have the International Foundation for Electoral Systems representative, and that is the organization which monitors elections in different countries. And Lisa, as someone who has a knowledge about the experiences of other countries, how would you comment the implementation of elections in our country? How did the pandemic generally affect the elections around the world, and how did it affect our country? And were there any special problems compared to some other countries?
Thank you for that question, Emir. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Certainly many of the challenges that Commissioner Hadžiabdić just highlighted are global trends that we're seeing happening in many countries currently and over the past year. The delay of elections is something that's been very common. We've seen delays in more than 75 different countries and territories, and that's meant election authorities have been put in the position of having to scramble and work to adjust on very short timelines. A lot of logistical issues with polling station procedures, which have also meant training difficulties to make sure that polling place workers are able to implement new procedures that are put into place. We've seen globally issues with poll worker dropouts as people have felt uncomfortable serving in polling stations due to their own personal health risks, and also the same sort of obstacles to ensuring the enfranchisement of sick and quarantined voters that the commissioner highlighted are very common issues that we're seeing, necessitating some quick thinking and some alterations to procedures and regulatory standards around how to make sure people have access to the vote. Also, promoting voter turnout has been a challenge. We've seen declines in voter turnout globally as people have been worried about their safety and being able to cast their ballot during the pandemic. And the budget constraints, generally election administration is done on a very tight budget, and the additional challenges of procuring personal protective equipment, ensuring training models, transferring training models to virtual formats to reach poll workers have all introduced additional costs that have often not been factored into those budgets that election administrators have to work with. It's impacted election observation, both domestic and international, travel restrictions, worries about crowding at polling stations. And at the same time, election observation has become more important than ever in ensuring confidence in election processes that have been changed so suddenly and rapidly in a way that makes some voters nervous about the integrity of electoral processes. And on top of all of that, sometimes in this incredibly difficult situation of election administrators putting new processes and procedures in place, other important tasks have been neglected in some instances, voter information being a very critical piece of this. So voters are aware that processes and procedures are changing, but maybe without robust voter information, unaware of exactly how they've changed, which does create a framework in which there's a lot of possibility for misinformation, disinformation, distrust, or just fear around going out to vote and feeling like you can be safe while you do that. So certainly echoing a lot of similar themes that the commissioner highlighted. And then some cases in the case of Bosnia, the mayoral elections in Travnik, where one of the contestants passed away due to COVID-19 on election day or right around election day, who then had gotten the most votes in that election, which puts pressure on the question of, how do you adapt in a situation like this? Do you rerun elections? Does the second highest vote getter become elected? And these challenges are certainly one example of the extreme uncertainty that has emerged in the case of the pandemic.
Thank you. I'm glad that you mentioned some of the things things that we will be discussing later. We will get back on them. I want to ask a question to Ms. Korajlić. So the Transparency International monitors also the various aspects of the election process, and I want to start now with the period even before the elections, and more precisely with the financing of the political parties and the campaigns. Did the pandemic affect party and campaign funding, and how, and what are the interesting things that you noticed in that field, and was something different when comparing to the previous years because of the pandemic?
Thanks, and first of all, hello to everyone. Well, it definitely affected the type of expenditure of political parties this last year. We monitored the period 3 months before the election day, and focusing also on the abuse of state resources for the election purposes. When it comes to typical campaigning, we saw more focus on online campaigning and expenditure through social networks and online media more than, for example, campaign rallies, even though there were a lot of political parties who still held campaign rallies live with hundreds of people there and not respecting the measures. There still were fewer of these events than there usually would be. Also, this showed also within their financial reports that they submitted that most of the parties did not have significant expenditures when it comes to campaign rallies. But we still saw significant expenditure through media advertising, and we also, by comparing our monitoring of the expenditure with what they reported in their financial reports, saw that the general expenditure is lower than usually, but they still underreported it. So they still haven't reported significant amounts. There is a huge discrepancy between their financial reports and what they actually spent. But what we also saw is the abuse of, let's say, even the health institutions before the elections, where some of the political parties were distributing what they called COVID tests or abusing healthcare workers for the purpose of their election promotion. We basically identified more than almost 2,500 cases of abuse of state resources, and a significant amount of this is related to health sector, offering free services, free checkups. We saw politicians actually being at the health institutions, hanging out with the patients and similar, distributing medicines even with the political party slogans, etc. So we see every year this type of abuse of state resources, but this year they focused more on the health sector. And also since the elections were postponed, the campaign period actually lasted longer than usually. And we saw more cases of premature campaigning and paid advertising than that we usually see.
Thank you. We'll also be talking later about those violations of rules of campaigns. The Coalition Pod Lupom also monitors compliance with various rules of election process. I want to know, were these local elections in our country regular? What is your general assessment of the regularity of the elections, including the delay that happened, the entire campaign, the implementation of the elections, and also the results, but as well as the repeated elections that happened in several cities? Was everything implemented as required by law? And also, I want to know one more thing: manipulation and abuse of the polling station committees is something that is unfortunately present in every election process in our country. What was the situation like this year? Did you notice any abuse, and did these problems had anything to do with the pandemic, or it was as usual?
So hello everyone, I hope you do hear me well. Thank you for the opportunity. If I have to summarize the elections, previous elections, 2020, which actually consisted of several different election processes, since we had a separate election process in Mostar after 12 years, or two also repeated elections in Dobo and Srebrenica, and we still have two to come. I would say that we had increase in irregularities in pre-election period, that we had usual election days, and that we had unusual circumstances. So organizing and conducting elections and implementing everything in all these circumstances was a little miracle, I would even say, from different election stakeholders. If we speak about concrete irregularities regarding the pre-election period, we have done long-term observation, which lasts for 3 months before the election day. And we recorded more than 1,200 of different types of irregularities. Most common of them are early campaigning, which is forbidden by law, public servants in the campaigning and as candidates on the list, abuse of state resources, polling station illegal trading, and biased media reporting. So these are top 5 that I would say happened before the election day, and some of them are mentioned through in your presentation, Emir, or by your question now regarding the polling station committee trading. Regarding the E-Day findings, I would say that in accordance with the election law, the process was at the vast majority of polling stations. This is something that we usually say diplomatically, but it does not reflect the real picture when you take the whole process. So we have significant problems registered on the election day in about 4% of the polling stations, but with different types of irregularities or procedural mistakes at up to 70% of the polling stations. I would say that one of the major findings is that society has shown some kind of the maturity, I would say, in one way in epidemiological reasons, or sense, because we had elections during the epidemic and it went pretty well. We had no major consequences on the rise of number of people infected, which was a concern, but we also had some kind of the political or democratic improvements or maturity shown. So for example, we for the first time had 2 major political leaders, Bakir Izetbegović and Milorad Dodik, acknowledging that they lost election races in certain municipalities and cities, which was really different to see, especially during the election night. Usually they would challenging results and speaking of different irregularities or calling people to go out and protest against these results. So I think it was a good step forward, maybe small step forward, but good step forward. Even they changed a little bit of their rhetorics in the upcoming days after the elections. These elections are also were a big challenge for the election administration in organizing and conducting the elections, but also for other stakeholders. And we also had organized attempts to prevent non-partisan election observation, which actually culminated in canceling elections in Doboj because of this reason majoring. So different type of irregularities can be seen from different points of view. One of them is by the severity, how hard of these irregularities or how big impact they have on the election process. So regarding the top 5 by severity on the election day, I would say that some of them are mentioned also by Irena. We had a denial of the constitutionally guaranteed right to vote to persons suffering from COVID-19 or in isolation. They had the possibility to vote by COVID mobile teams, but many of them did not use this possibility even if they wanted to. So we had people in our team which were calling local election commissions, wanted to vote because they were in isolation, and they were prevented from doing so. So even if they are really, really eager to vote for the election day, we also had more than 50,000 people in isolation in this period of time. So many of them did not actually use this possibility. Also, we had preventing observers to observe elections, especially in Doboj, what I already said. We also had vote pressure on voters in 76 different polling stations, different type of irregularities in voting. And we also had a lack of election material in opening, and also accuracy test not being accurate in counting procedures. So this voting by mobile teams created a little bit of chaotic situation, or not a little bit, big chaos in the field, because many accuracy tests were not actually in accordance to the prescribed rules because of the COVID teams taking out of the polling station the ballots or bringing in the ballots which were actually not then counted properly, and even this process was not possible to be done properly as it is prescribed by the law. And to conclude, regarding the frequency, which is another point of view on the election irregularities on the election day, we had family voting on 68% of the polling station. We had voters not being on the voters list in the polling station where they do traditionally vote in 45% of the polling station. We had no list of polling station committee members with assigned political parties posted in 1/3 of the polling station. This was directly a recommendation of the Pod Lupom, which was implemented by the Central Election Commission back in 2018, not being respected, and we do not have any consequences or sanctions for that. This is the crucial element for preventing illegal trading of polling station committee membership. We had also cases where one person held different number of voters in 1/4 of the polling station, and on 1 out of 5 polling station we had result copy being posted, even it is also obligation for the polling station committee members. So just to summarize, and if I took so many time for answering the question, elections are not okay, and they are not in accordance to the international standards in the elections. It is confirmed by 4 verdicts of the European Court for Human Rights, and we have too many different issues. What is maybe a good compared to previous time is that nobody is denying this anymore. So even political parties, decision makers, international community, NGOs, and even the election administration, which was most reluctant on acknowledging this, is not saying anymore that elections are fine. They are not fine, and we have a lot of work to be done. Not so much is done in previous 7 years until we work on the election observation, but we hope that this year will be the one. We hope that international and domestic court decisions will be implemented on some kind of the political level agreement, but also we hope for the technical improvements regarding changing appointment of the polling station committee members, electronic identification introduction, electronic results tabulation introduction, improving complaints and accreditation procedures, preventing massive fraud of postal voting, which is completely a compromise process, and etc. So I will stop now. Thank you.
Thank you for your insights. It's unfortunate to say that the situation is that bad, but we'll have at least opportunity at the end to say what needs to be done in order to have more free and democratic elections in our country. Thank you. And now, Danira, so CA Not deals with transparency, openness, and accountability, among the other things. I want to know how transparent and accountable are the parties in the institution in our country. Are there any specific objections when it comes to the institutions and other bodies and actors that are dealing with the elections?
Thank you, Emir. And before I answer my question, I would like to greet all viewers as well as our panelists on my own behalf and on behalf of Truthometer and other colleagues working on political responsibility projects and Why Not. As you said, our organization deals with issues of openness of institutions, political entities and parties from many angles. One of them is certainly the fact-checking of official statements and the monitoring of pre-election promises, and the other another segment refers to the monitoring of openness of institutions, both on higher levels of government and on the local level. As our activities that we carry out are aimed at citizens, IA providing quality and verified information so that citizens can make more responsible choices during the elections. This year, we can notice in the narratives spread by political parties and entities during their political rallies and presentations to the public that the topic of transparency often appeared as a priority. The results of Openness Index that measures the openness of institution shows that the results are not satisfactory. And we have been conducting this research for 5 years. Given that these were the local elections, it is appropriate for me to refer more to municipalities and cities in our country. And the results of Openness Index for the local self-governments, all of them in our country, is only 33%, which is really low. The general conclusion would be that there is no strategic commitment to the openness, and that it pretty much depends on the goodwill of the person which is leading that institution. An interesting example, which is very related to the recent campaigns that we did during the local elections, is one of our apps that we made, which is called Votometer or Glasometar, are the answers that we received from the candidates, but also from the mayors who were already in power or managing those institutions at that time. And they basically ran for a new term. In the answers we received from them, the mayors answered that they were in favor of opening the institutions, opening the budget sessions, and other things. And while they were in a favor to opening these things, they had 4 years to implement these things, and they basically didn't. And they didn't do anything to improve the general openness of institutions. And that is why the commitment to transparency and openness is really nothing more than a declarative commitment of both candidates and political parties and mayors in this sense. So yeah, and this is for now.
Thank you for your insights. Now I want to get back to the campaigns, political campaigns. Both Ivana and Dario said that there are various violations of the rules of how to run a campaign, and you both mentioned that some of the violations. Ivana, you said that the main difference this year was that the campaigns were more focused on the online sphere, the social media and the online media. I want to know what kind of violations you recorded, and even more important question is, has anyone been sanctioned for such violations?
Well, first we had a lot of cases, as I said, of premature campaigning before the official start of the campaign, and paid advertising mostly through social networks, but also through billboards and other types of advertising. I think that we submitted more than 100 reports to Central Election Commission. And for the very first time, I think that they sanctioned a majority of the cases, even related to promotion on social media. I think that around 50 reports that we submitted ended with the fines that were given by Central Election Commission to political parties or candidates who violated and for the premature campaigning. But we also saw other types of violations of the campaigning. Unfortunately, some of these cases happened before the official start of the campaign. We had these famous cases of hate speech directly through promotional videos of political parties, and the attempt of Central Election Commission to actually harshly sentence this type of behavior. But then this resulted with the decision of the court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, who interpreted these rules that they apply only within the official period of the campaign. And this was, I mean, a very, I think, dangerous message sent to political parties for the future elections if we do not change anything within the law, or at least some of the provisions related to campaigning, because this will send a message to political parties that they can do whatever they want before the official start of the campaign. So even the hate speech, even the threats, vote buying. There were some, in one of the instances that we reported to Central Election Commission, which happened after this decision of the court, there was a case of a political party who distributed money at their campaign rally, which happened before the official start of the campaign. And unfortunately, there was no sanction for this because this happened before the official start of the campaign. On the other hand, we don't have judiciary that would want to deal with these issues, even when it comes to hate speech, even when it comes to vote buying, even when it comes to threats to voters. We tried to report these cases numerous times to prosecutors, but they just interpret this as something that is within the political speech, even though there were cases of politicians directly threatening citizens that they will lose their jobs if they do not vote for a certain party or a candidate. And even the prosecutor's office's official opinion that this is just a part of political rhetoric and that these threats are not serious is again sending a message to political parties that they can basically do whatever they want during their campaigning. And I think that this is a very important aspect of regulations on campaigning that needs to be improved in the future. Clarifications regarding the period that they apply to, but also in terms of even the criminal codes and clarification of criminal offenses related to threats to voters and basically attempts to intimidate or to cancel someone's right to participate in elections.
Thank you. It's not sounding so optimistically when we say that the politicians and the political actors can do almost whatever they want, which is outside of the legal framework. But it feels like that there has been some kind of change in how the Central Election Commission was addressing the online advertising violations connected to the online promotions. When we compare last year elections with the 2018 and every election before that. Ms. Hadžiabdić, I want to know, is this estimate accurate? Has there any kind of change? And if so, why it happened? Also, were there any changes of the legal framework when we compare the last year elections to the, for example, 2018 elections?
What is obvious is that campaign moved on social networks due to pandemic. And the answer to your questions depends from which angle you look at it. So in 2018, if we compare 2018 and 2020, and in this area, talking about early campaigning, especially hate speech in campaigning and violation of election silence, we didn't change the rules, but when we look at the reports on violations, in 2018, we got only 46 reports. In 2020, we got 249 reports. But the number of sanctions for hate speech was much higher in 2018, when we had 12 sanctions for hate speech. In 2020, we had only 3 sanctions, and we failed with 2, unfortunately, because we, as Ms. Korajlić just explained, didn't pay attention to the official campaign period. For me, there was one characteristic, important characteristic that maybe you didn't pay attention to. It is actually who reported the violations. In 2018, these were the reports came from political entities, political parties, independent candidates, coalition. This time, all reports, almost all, came from the civil society groups or international organizations. And political parties didn't report violations almost at all. It looked to us in Central Election Commission like there is some kind of solidarity on the scene. We won't blame you, you won't blame us. And thanks to the extended hand of civil society groups who actually have this monitoring, let's say, system in place that Election Commission doesn't have. We have only one person, that is PR, to monitor all these irregularities on social networks. We need the whole department. So for us, all this information that we got from them, we took it seriously as initiatives, and then we had official procedures. So in total, we had 60 sanctions for 2020, but they were pretty low because the law in Bosnia and Herzegovina has a very low sanctions for violations. We don't have a proper mechanism to actually prevent, and we don't have a proper tools to prevent all these irregularities. It is really we cannot accept situation that you can say whatever you want on 31st day prior to the election silence, and then on 30 days prior to the election silence, you can say whatever you cannot say. And they are all very careful. And we had maybe less hate speech because we had these 2 sanctions that were some kind of lessons to everyone. So during the election campaign, and that was maybe the only news, that we didn't have a lot of violations. But I'm really very thankful to the Transparency International, especially to Coalition under Magnificent Eyes for their activism. And they really acted as our extended hand during these elections. And with all these joint efforts, I think we managed somehow to fight with all this, what ruined the confidence in elections in general.
Thank you. And I want to still ask you another question. So when we are talking about the changes of the legal frameworks and in general about the changes in the electoral process, since the pandemic has forced us to adjust all aspects of our life and to switch it to online or electronic work, everything but except the elections. I want to know, is it finally time to start talking seriously about the electronic voting, not only because of the pandemic, but also because of all of the other issues that we are hearing, the fairness of the elections, but also the speed of the counting of votes, which is really slow in our country. How realistic is it to expect such changes in the near future?
Well, we in election administration would have a great life if we would have some kind of additional new technologies to conduct elections, especially when the confidence is ruined and when we have to change something. But it is not going very easy. We are trying our best to get together with, at the moment, EU to provide some funds to test. Electronic voting is actually very expensive and demanding equipment, I'm afraid, for a lot of voters in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There is a lot of talks about the scanners as well, or about electronic poll book. And we have the whole 5 years old strategy for the 5 years period that we actually submitted to Parliament. And we got it thanks to the EU projects and international organization who helped us to develop it. And it's a great guidance for the parliament to see how the elections can be improved, but I'm afraid that no one is paying attention to that. What I would like to be sure, if we would have a new technology approved for implementation by parliament, to be sure that it performs properly, that we can actually test it earlier. We don't want to fail, but I'm afraid that for 2022 elections, it can be, I mean, too advanced to expect that that will happen in 2022, maybe in 2024, if there is a good will in parliament. We have to pay attention to some regulations in election law. I mean, at least 20 articles, depending on what we want. And it can work, and we need something, because we cannot continue like this. If we continue like this with these polling station committees, we will actually, without new technologies, with all these people who are engaged on election day ready to do the irregularities and fraud, I'm afraid that we will have to go back and to supervise 1998 and supervise the whole process, and to have supervision at each polling station. So let us see what our parliament will do, because we can have a great ideas, but we were not able even to do the testing, and we are actually very disappointed how it is going. It's like everyone is talking, it is necessary, but everyone is actually trying not to have it in place.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. I am able to change the electoral system within just 1 year, but I would like to see some concrete actions on the field in creating or suggesting the new systems that will help us bypass these issues that we're talking about. Dario, I want to know how different or harder or more complicated was your job this time than in the last elections? Were there any differences in the number of observers compared to the previous elections? Because you already mentioned that you had some kind of problems on the field when it comes to the observers. And how did the observation generally go? And were the conditions on the polling stations on the field respected? And what kind of evaluations did you recorded on the election day?
So these were the most complicated elections, and definitely more complicated than before. But not only for us, it was for the all election stakeholders the same situation: election administration, political parties from the campaign perspective, election administration from the organizational logistics perspective, and ours also, from all different angles, from field work, long-term observation in the field, education, citizens recruitment, observers trainings, logistics, to E-Day observation. We had to adjust to all of this. So for example, we had a video trainings, online trainings, and similar. We also provided all the protective equipment for the observers on the election day and similar. But COVID-19 was not the only challenge before these elections, and this is the reason why I said that the organizing elections was a small miracle. Yeah, so COVID-19 was only one challenge. We had also a challenge of postponing elections. It happened first time in the history, post-war history of the country. The law is strict, and it says that elections are held on the first Sunday in October every 2 years, and they can be postponed as if the religious holiday falls on that day. But it was, I think, the purpose of that provision was regarding the major holidays, or actually the major Muslim holiday which moves during the year. Now it is used as excuse to postpone different types of elections, different number of times, and even more than it is prescribed, for more period than it is prescribed by the law and similar. So this was also a we can thank to global warming that we had nice day on November 15, but this could also be a organizational and turnout aspect or influence on the elections with the new date of the elections. We also had undermining the influence and role of the Central Election Commission, especially by certain political parties who had their people inside the Election Commission, and they do not have anymore because it is at the end of the day political functions. They are elected in parliaments. And we always had this undermining the role of Central Election Commission because of the procedure of the new and re-elected members' appointment, which was completely in accordance to the law, but still. And we also had this greater proactivity of the CC that was mentioned by you a couple of times, especially regarding the early campaigning, sanctioning, and then some kind of new modalities to overcome the situation. We also had voting by post, which was really, really challenging process. More than 5,000 people actually testified, said that their personal data were stolen and misused, and that some other people intended to vote instead of them, which is the most major election irregularity, to steal someone's vote, and similar, and the completely compromised, which I already mentioned. And we also had Mostar elections, which with also that can be seen as a challenge, because all eyes were directed to Mostar, and there was a good and bad side of it. And also we saw what happened in Mostar after the polling stations were closed and after the votes were counted. So somebody stole more than 3,000 votes, personal votes, in the process, which was not visible to the observers at all, in the transportation of the election material or entrance of the results into the system. And I saw some of the questions in the chat, and nobody actually is responsible or accountable for this or sanctioned for this, which was a major election fraud happening. So there was more and more challenge in the election process. What we are really happy with is that elections took place, that we had no major health consequences of it, that we had no major, except these people in isolation, voting rights violations, and that we succeeded to observe elections. Regarding the difficulties or what was different than before, many people gave up as observers. Also, many people were afraid to go out to observe in the state of pandemic. But we managed to send more than 2,800 people, almost 3,000 people in the field. We wanted to send or planned to send 3,000 of them, but there was just no people. So when we sum up all of these elections, Mostar, November 15 elections, and repeated elections in Doba i Srebrenica, a total of 2,800 people observed elections in approximately every fourth polling station in the country. I already mentioned major irregularities, so I will not repeat myself. So I will stop here.
Thank you, and we can only hope that your job will be easier next year in the next election cycle. Danira, my next question goes for you. So the Truthometer analyzes and monitors the fulfillment of the pre-election promises and the programs of the parties. To what extent do the local authorities keep their promises, and are they any better than higher levels of government? And I also wonder if you have noticed any changes in promises and programs this year due to the pandemic.
Yeah, correct, Emir. Istinomjer or Truthometer has been monitoring local government since 2010, and we've conducted this year, the last year, the fourth year of a mandate in 12 local sub-governments in Bosnia. If we compare this campaign to the campaign that was done in 2016, we've gathered, or to the campaign that was done in 2012, we've gathered 735 promises. During 2012 local elections campaign, we've gathered a slightly smaller number of promises, to be precise, 659 promises. The percentage of fulfilled promises in 2012 between these two mandates only differs in a mile. So basically in 2016, when we finalized that cycle, we've got the results of 44% of fulfilled promises, while in 2020, we've got the same basically percentage, 44.8% of fulfilled promises. There was a big difference in numbers of promises made among those local self-governments where leaders ran in 2016, and basically they had a program then. On the other hand, some of them who performed their functions for several terms did not have election programs available at all. So basically a mayor who had a program back then in 2012 when they were campaigning, they had something, and this year they kind of decided not to have one. You asked if the local government is better than higher levels of government. Yeah, we've published the results, and the local government is still better in performing than higher levels of government. And the percentage is, of course, much higher. When it comes to narratives and the promises they gave in this campaign, we've noticed that certain candidates, especially those running for a new term, didn't have election programs. The situation with pandemic also contributed to the smaller numbers of promises that we had opportunity to collect during the pre-election rallies. It is also important to point out that although it is of course commendable that Istinomjer kind of like pushed all these certain local self-governments to give better and more measurable programs in certain communities, of course, local self-governments kind of just decided not to have them, or to totally ignore the public, or to address the public in a proper way, to present their programs to the public and the citizens in the sense. Since Istinomjer or Turnout this year wanted to increase the number of local communities that we will include in the monitoring in the next 4 years, we wanted to collect more and to monitor more, but we couldn't collect programs and promises, of course, for a lot of cities and municipalities in our country. So I should be able to emphasize that, again, these are the municipalities where mayors had previously had a mandate, and this was a continuation of the same mandate. When it comes to what mayors promised, what often appears as a common theme or component topic is precisely the transparency we talked before. And besides transparency, you have social benefits, protections of pensions, scholarships, and most of those promises are made in a way that it cannot be precisely measured. They are not really concrete in that sense. What is strange somehow is that the environmental component is not included in most of the programs we've collected. Of course they have it, but not to extent it should be on the local level, since this is a really big and important topic for these elections that we had.
Thank you, Danira.
Yeah,
and Lisa, the next thing I want to talk about is disinformation and their real impact on the elections. How much do you think that the disinformation in general can affect the election results? Now, are the things that I talked at the beginning from the research from my presentation something that is happening elsewhere in the world, or are some of these things unique for our country? And I also want to know, how much do you think that disinformation can harm the technical implementation of the election, the citizens' knowledge, but also the integrity of the whole process, especially in the time of the pandemic, when we have different rules and different ways of voting for some people?
Absolutely, a great question. This this point of to what degree does disinformation impact election results and election outcomes is an open question globally. Certainly in the dissection and post-electoral analysis in a lot of countries, we see this question rising, and there's sort of a lack of empirical evidence to be able to say definitively to what degree has disinformation changed the results of an election. But to some degree, this project of political candidates attempting to influence the ideas of voters is the nature of politics. The question of this moment is, in what ways have online networked communication changed the game in ways that obstructs the ability of voters to make informed decisions? So when it comes to changing electoral results, I see voter suppression as being a theme of a lot of disinformation campaigns that could have some impact on electoral outcomes. But I want to draw attention to that second part of the question you asked in particular, and that's this broader worry about to what degree does disinformation about electoral processes hollow out voters' confidence in electoral processes, in electoral institutions, and in democracy as an idea that's worth pursuing in general. And when we zoom out to the global picture, this is the concern that keeps me up at night, certainly. When we look at foreign influence operations and disinformation campaigns emanating from Russia, China, Iran, and elsewhere, one of the key pillars of those campaigns isn't about changing votes from one candidate to another. It's about undermining belief in democracy writ large. And so it's a delicate thing when you look at disinformation campaigns that look to cast doubt about election integrity, because you're balancing different very real concerns. When there are sort of flaws in electoral processes that there's very legitimate reasons to bring attention to, that should be part of the conversation. But we also see this tactic from both foreign and domestic political contenders of pointing out the lack of integrity in the electoral process and spinning disinformation narratives around that as a way to seed doubt in advance of an election that can then be taken advantage of in a post-electoral period to bring legal challenges that further undermine the faith that election outcomes are reflecting the will of individuals. So I think that broader project, the ease with which disinformation can be used to create chaos and doubt and a belief that what is true and uncertainty on the part of voters about the very nature of truth is a much bigger, broader threat that's a lot harder to wrap your head around and a lot harder to think about how do we change this narrative or sway this narrative. So those are some of the pieces that I certainly think about in terms of the impacts of disinformation.
Thank you. And before we continue with the last round of questions, I would propose a small break, but not a usual break, but I propose that we see the video that we have prepared. So we have heard that different civil society organizations are working on the topics connected to the elections. We have prepared a short video that will show us what some of the organizations, other civil society organizations in Bosnia, but also the youth organizations were doing around the elections and what they think about the impact of the pandemic on the elections. So can we please see the video now?
My name is Marisa and I will present the activities of 2020 election campaign and activities that Youth Movement Revolt organized before and after local elections. The first activity that we organized was the School of Political Activism. The school actually had several outcomes, such as involving 22 young people that came to this school. Then 7 of 22 participants were candidates for local elections, and the three participants actually got a mandate in city council. After the School of Political Activism, we conducted diverse activities such as public debate, public forum, then video campaigns with young candidates, photo exhibition, then different local actions, street actions, and we also have a few columns written on the topic of local elections 2020. The outcomes of these activities was that one candidate that also followed all of the activities, such as interview, public debate, and she was actually present in all the activities. Also the School of Political Activism, she got a mandate in city council, and actually we are really proud of that, because she's a woman, and she's a young person that wants to change something in the local community. We wanted to give them power of decision-making process, and we wanted to give them a chance to see how actually powerful is local governance, and how much they can do themselves to improve the work of local governance. The pandemic didn't affect our activities a lot, since we are the organization that work in public space and most of the time on streets. It was a little bit hard for us, but it didn't give a lot of attention to prevent us of organizing the events. Actually, the events were organized for under 30 people only. When it comes to elections and young people, I think that pandemic affected them too, like economically, socially, psychologically, and it affected them on all these levels. And I think it also represented itself when it comes to voting process. But somehow I hope that this actually motivated young people more than it motivated them in the few past years when it comes to local elections. When it comes to fake news, I think that fake news affect young people a lot, and it showed itself during the election campaign. Since Raskrinkavanje got in public space in Bosnia, and since it spread around the civil society, I think the media decreased fake news, but when it comes to individuals, groups, public figures, and some websites, I think we still have a problem when it comes to fake news and disinformations.
During these street actions, I must admit that the citizens were friendly and open to talk to our activists about the local elections, about the problems they face in their local community. In addition, they didn't hide their dissatisfaction with the current government structures, and most of them want to give their vote to young candidates because they believe that young people are the ones who can make some change here in our society, and they think if they are vote for the young candidates, for young people, that the young people stay here in Bosnia and do some things and try actually to do some things to fix our problems and make our society more and country more democratical. Unfortunately, I must say, when we talk about the motivates that young people have when they vote for their candidates on election, when choosing, I should mention that these are the most common decisions that are not made independently. Young people in Bosnia and Herzegovina in elections vote for the candidates told by their parents or friends, vote for their friends or friends of friends who collect the votes for their jobs in the political party out of the sympathy for a particular candidate. And a very, very low number of young people actually read the political party program and vote based on the quality of the candidate. And it's the big problem of not just local election but and the general election where we choose the candidates on the list.
We have done trainings for local representatives through our Youth Participate project, which deals with the involvement of young people in decision-making processes. Through this project, we want to move young people, but at the same time, try to influence the government's attitude towards young people. At the trainings, we educated secondary school students about their possible participation in decision-making processes and thus to vote in the upcoming elections, about the very importance of their objective vote in the elections also. We also did a research on youth participation in decision-making processes, and at the end of 2020 we completed a publication on the same topic, which we will use to provide secondary school students with even more opportunities and fight to improve their status. I would single out the work of the organization in general during the pandemic and the way we managed to organize our activities, work with secondary school students and offer them the same opportunities as before. We tried to make all activities useful for secondary school students and for them to feel the support of the association. And as an example, I will use the protests in Gorazde, where secondary school students protested for the lack of transportation to school for their peers from the surrounding area of Gorazde. There is no official data about how much the pandemic really impacted the number of young voters. However, the pandemic affected every voter, as some were in isolation and so were young people. The voting system in isolation was not specified and there were many mistakes, so I believe that a lot of young people were demotivated. Young people do not really understand the work of municipal and city authorities, and therefore it is not important to them. Through our research on the participation of young people in decision-making processes, we could see that young people do not even know who to turn to solve problems in their local community. Misinformation has a significant impact on voters, which is a big problem and a disease of the digital society. In order for young people to be able to make quality and correct decisions, they must be informationally and media literate, because the pile of data that comes from the media comes without any filter. So young people experience a so-called information shock. What we have as an advantage is our cooperation with the Zašto Ne organization, as well as their project Ne gledamo prazno, where young people have the opportunity to be educated about media literacy, as well as the fight against misinformation.
And we are back. It is nice to hear that different organizations are trying to influence positive changes when it comes to different aspects of election promises, or to the election process, I'm sorry. So let's get back to our discussion and to the final round of questions for our panelists. And I will start the last round with Dario. Dario, in some cities in the country, some kind of election changes had taken place. I have heard several times from different people theory that due to the pandemic, the elderly stayed at home and the young people went to the polling station. This theory explains that the absence of senior citizens in the election resulted in changes in some local communities. I want to know, is there any truth in that theory? Were there any differences in turnout in general this year? And is it true that the turnout of the younger population has increased while the turnout of the older population decreased this year?
So I will start with saying that we have a lot of different myths regarding the election process in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So one of them definitely is that young people do not go out to vote. And statistics show it is partially true, but not so dramatic difference comparing to general turnout is marked or recorded comparing the official data. So, for example, 46% of the youth population below 30 years old is the turnout of the youth population, while the general turnout is around 54%. So there is a slight difference between younger and elderly going out to vote, but it is not so dramatic as we sometimes heard, such as some of people saying it is only around 20%, which is actually different set of data that Central Election Commission provides in their information regarding the elections, which is actually percentage of the young population in the total eligible voters in the total voting body. So this is the first myth. I think young people go out to vote. Of course, more of them could go out to vote, but many of them actually do not want to do that, not because they're not interested in the political processes, but because they are disgusted with all of this. So with this current state in the country and everything, and they don't want to get legitimacy to anyone, even through this activity of going out to vote. Yeah. Second, turnout is that general turnout is low. So it depends. It depends from what we expect on the personal or some other level, but also we need to understand how the turnout is calculated, and it is calculated out of all the eligible voters. And thanks to this voter list, which is overpumped, which is over-exaggerated with the number of voters, 94% of the population is on the voter list, which is not possible because we had at least 18% of minor population. So the turnout is calculated out of this big number, 3.35 million people who are eligible to vote. We also have big diaspora. We have one of the biggest brain drains, third biggest brain drain in the world after Venezuela and Haiti of youth, of young people. We also have at least 400,000 people who are on the voters list but actually do not live out in the country. So when we sum up or distract all of these numbers, out of people who are living in the country, real turnout goes up to 64%, which is actually pretty fair, especially in comparison to some Western democracies. I would like it is 100%, maybe some other of us, but it is hard to expect when you have no obligatory voting. And I think obligatory voting is not a good idea at all. So I have to confess that your point regarding younger population went out to vote more and the elderly stayed home influence the changes is interesting point, but we still need to wait for the official data, which will be publicized by Central Election Commission in order to confirm this. So far, we know that the turnout in these elections is around 4% lower compared to both the last general elections 2018 and the last local elections which happened in 2016. So it is lower, and it is probably results of the pandemic, but it is not tremendously lower as we were afraid. And last, on the changes that you mentioned, I don't think, or the major changes did not happen at all, or actually, yeah. But the changes that happened in two major cities, and it has its importance because change usually starts from the big cities and urban areas, but not tremendous or big changes happened in large number of municipalities. Through the years, some changes are happening really slowly, such as the role of independent candidates, especially in local elections. We have many of these being elected as mayors in local communities, but these elections actually changes happen only in Sarajevo and Banja Luka, which are important, but are not some reflection to all municipalities. And this is what I'm heading for, and where I want to make the point why these changes do not happen that quickly. And the foreigners usually ask me how it is possible that people in Bosnia are so dissatisfied with their government and with the current system, and they still elect the same people. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that the answer is in two points that influence this. First one is that many people who are not satisfied actually left or still leaving the country, and they usually do not vote anymore. This is the first reason. And second reason is actually that many of us are corrupt, and we have to face this. Up to 800,000 people have direct benefit of the current system, of the current political parties, of the system which is built, and still preserved on the corruption. And through the party employment, social benefits, which are given not based on the necessity, but based on the status and based on the corruptive activities, many people actually vote in favor or as a favor to the political parties who employ them or gave them some benefits that they do not usually are entitled to. And until we break this corruptive mechanism, until we break this capture state phenomena, until we break this strong influence and position of the political parties who corrupted the system, who took the system under their own, we cannot expect, I'm afraid, the big changes. I hope that we are heading to it.
Thank you, Dario, for your explanation. Danira, I know that Turnout had a special category this year, which you called Generalized Election, if I may translate it like that. What actually does that mean, and what have you noticed?
Yes, you're correct, Emir. We called it, basically this phenomenon, the generalization of local election is not a practice that we've only seen this year. It has been a practice we've seen in the previous years. And it's basically something that political parties in our country do. And the reason, because we hear all of these topics that have nothing basically to do with local elections, is why we've decided to collect them and to publish them in a form of live blog. What has somehow largely followed these local elections and public narratives was that some candidates decided to highlight their war past and the war past of other candidates, or to say opposing candidates. Thus, several candidates, for instance, in Sarajevo municipality or Sarajevo Canton, decided to highlight their wartime title during the election campaign. For example, the candidate for the mayor of Ilija, Fikret Prevljak, was always announced during public rallies as a general, a big general. In addition to this wartime topic that was really a big thing during these election campaign time. Candidates usually discussed matters that are jurisdiction of cantonal level, republic level, or state level. Thus, the topics they emphasized were, for instance, creation of Republic of Srpska, competencies of high representatives, or the promises of departure of the high representative. Also, topic of NATO, cantonal disputes over companies that are not under local jurisdiction. For instance, in Sarajevo, there was a big discussion about cantonal firm for water supply and sewage and water reductions and so on. Besides these topics, a lot of nationalistic rhetoric was recorded during election campaign for the local elections, while candidates spoke a lot less about topics that are local, and those topics are really important and really close to the citizens. That's kind of a shame, but that's not the thing we're not accustomed to, since we see it like each cycle during the local elections in our country.
Thank you, Danira. We have heard several times today that large rallies were organized throughout the country during the campaign. Ivana, I want to know how many such rallies have you recorded? Are there any interesting facts that you want to share with us? And has anyone been sanctioned for organizing such events?
Well, yes, I think that around 1/3 of the rallies that we monitored, we covered 70 municipalities across the country, were basically held against the epidemiological measures and recommendations from the authorities, even though our observers reported that there were law enforcement representatives there to secure the rallies, but they did not react to the fact that the measures were not respected. We even had situations which I don't even have words to describe, where not only did candidates use children, small children in schools for their own promotion, but were not even respecting the measures there, while, you know, taking pictures with children and hanging out with children on their first day of school, etc. They even distributed promotional materials to little kids in schools. This was all in front of the media. This was all covered by the media. News about this everywhere. We had huge rallies with hundreds of people, where not only there were no masks, but where candidates were actually within the groups of citizens, etc. As far as I know, none of these were actually either interrupted by any kind of law enforcement agencies or official or the institutions who are in charge to take care of that they are respecting the measures, but they even were present there and did not react at all. I think that this goes in line with everything that is going on in the country, even without the pandemic, where political parties, especially those that are in the government, are in power, can basically do whatever they want, and that those that are supposed to sanction this type of behavior are actually afraid to do anything about it. I mean, we even have a situation where representatives of law enforcement agencies and the local institutions and higher level institutions are forced to be present at campaign rallies in order to not lose their job. That they are forced to sign, they are forced to be there to show that this political party has a large number of supporters. And in this type of situation, no one wants to actually do anything to disrupt their or to endanger their position. And this also includes police and other institutions that are in charge of maintaining peace and order, as they like to say. There were some cases where some of the opposition events were obstructed and were banned due to the pandemic, but this did not apply to the ruling parties. And it is interesting, I mean, even as I said, when we compared the scale of these rallies and the number of the rallies in the case of particular parties and what they reported as their cost of the campaign, it's a couple of hundred KM. Which is impossible because especially now in the pandemic situation, they had a lot of additional equipment to broadcast these events online and to reach as many citizens as possible. They were still, you know, being held in large spaces that are very expensive to rent, even served food, etc. This year we didn't have, for example, concerts, which is at least something compared to previous election campaigns, but they still held them. And as far as we know, and as far as our observers reported, there were no cases that we identified where police even interrupted anything or tried to fine them for not implementing the measures that were prescribed.
Thank you. I want to get back to the disinformation topic that we were talking about earlier. Lisa, how do you see the role of social networks in electoral processes? We mentioned earlier the social networks, and can you agree that that we can see the increasing use of the social networks as the primary channel of communication, but also as a campaign battleground, let's call it like that? What does all this brings us? Are there any special dangers and problems? Now, for example, I think of, for example, Cambridge Analytica, but I'm just hoping that things of such scale and complexity are not happening in our country. But ad targeting certainly happens. Fake news is present. And also this will bring us the possibility of anonymity, which also brings another problems. So what do you see as the biggest dangers when talking about the social networks as a campaign battlegrounds?
Absolutely. I would certainly agree with the sentiment I've heard expressed many times today that the move towards online campaigning, which was already happening, has certainly been accelerated by the pandemic. And something at IFES that we're very interested at looking at is the use of disinformation as a campaign tactic with complete impunity. If you think about legal and regulatory frameworks governing elections, there's a lot of pre-existing standards around traditional media and other types of campaigning, but the space around how do you use social media in campaigns is one that's certainly still evolving, and a lot of countries are working to update legal and regulatory frameworks to adequately address this really complex place of campaigning that's happening. And as a result, globally, we're seeing sort of very few rules that apply to domestic actors' use of social media during campaigns. So things like detailed reporting on social media expenditures, including those made by third parties and PR firms. If we think about the world of abuse of state resources and what does that mean in the context of social media, so things like rules around the use of social media for campaigning by state employees or the use of official social media channels of state entities, that this is a place where rules are still evolving. Limits on the use of personal data by campaigns, which you alluded to. And all of this is made more complex by the types of definitional challenges, which have also been highlighted to some degree. Things like timeframes. Do these measures only apply during campaign periods, or do they apply outside of campaign periods? And a lot of complexity about defining what constitutes online campaigning. Is it just paid advertisements? Is it organic content as well? And those types of definitional considerations present a lot of challenges in the world of enforcement, which is already difficult in this space, due in large part to the types of information that the social media platforms make available to oversight bodies and to civil society who are looking to understand the types of conduct that domestic actors are behaving in online, but also the capacity of oversight bodies to use the tools that do exist to enforce and sanction appropriately the types of conduct that are happening online. So it's definitely a space where everyone is working to figure out how this can happen. And I think part of it involves building capacity of oversight bodies, but part of it involves pushing social media platforms to be more transparent about sort of advertisements that are happening on their platforms. We certainly see with Facebook, they're expanding the enforcement of their political ad library, but it is not in Bosnia and Herzegovina yet. It's not in many countries yet. And Google is even further behind in terms of making any sort of analytics available on political advertisements. So there's a lot of complexities, a lot of places where progress needs to be made, but it's certainly a space where comparative experience is useful because it's challenges that every country is dealing with right now.
Thank you. And my last question for today, or almost the last question for today, goes to the representative of Central Election Commission. So the elections in Doboj, but also in Srebrenica, were annulled and then repeated. How do you, first of all, comment on the boycott of the elections in Srebrenica by some parties? And also what attracted the public attention was the huge difference between the votes in the first repeated elections in Doboj. For example, Sanja Vulić won almost 20,000 less votes in the repeated elections, and the turnout was not that much lower. Now, how do you comment on such phenomena, given that the irregularity of the elections were determined by the mathematics, at least in this one case? Will anyone be responsible for that? And what is your institution doing in order to prevent, but also to sanction such activities and phenomena? And we also had a question from our guests about the irregularities in Mostar, which is almost the same as this question. Will anyone be responsible for irregularities that occurred?
Let me first say that participation in the elections is actually in the heart of democracy. And I can generally say that boycott has an important role when democracy is not functioning and when you do not have conditions for free and fair elections. What happened in Srebrenica and what was decision of definitely political participants in elections in Srebrenica, what was their reason, it will be judged by publicity, and we in Election Commission do not comment political decision. But I have to say a few words. First of all, if we have a boycott of the whole municipality and only one candidate would go out and vote, let's say one candidate for mayor, even with only his vote for himself, we will have the winner of that elections in that city because we don't have any limitations. Boycott definitely affected the appointment of polling station committees. And just a few days prior to the elections, the Municipal Election Commission in Srebrenica had a difficult task when they realized that actually they're getting information that people who are trained and certified as a member of polling station committee members will not show up on election day. So they had to react quickly to find replacement, and they managed to solve the problem, and we had polling station committees working on that day. It happened something that on the morning of E-Day, several people showed up and they said that someone signed the statements that they will not participate in elections and polling as a polling station committee members, and that they didn't sign that. And we were informed about that case by Municipal Election Commission in Srebrenica, and they find a way to engage that people. So it will be a lot of, I think, issues with an analysis what happened with boycott and what are the real reasons. Now let's switch to Doboj case. When we decided to annulate elections, I have to say, did that not because irregularities had effect on mandate. We can annulate elections if they have effect on results. And what we wanted to declare the correct results. And I think we did it, because when we repeated elections, although we had the lower turnout, and you mentioned the case of one female candidate who lost a lot of votes, but you have to know that some political subjects, although we had a lower turnout in Doboj on annulled elections, some of the political parties doubled the number of votes in our elections that we repeated. And I'm absolutely sure that we declared the correct results. When we have effect on mandates, then we are doing recount. So that is a big difference, mixed by a lot of even political actors who are confused, who say you didn't do anything, the result is the same. We didn't take care about results. Our role was to get the correct results, and something was wrong in Doboj, in Mostar as well. That's why immediately after November 15th, we actually sent a lawsuit for Srebrenica, Doboj, and Mostar with the names of all polling station committee members who worked on these polling stations. First in Srebrenica, Doboj, polling stations that we annulled elections. In Mostar, when we had indication that some election fraud is done, we discovered the election fraud in Mostar, but we couldn't do recount in the whole Mostar based on presumptions. In order to actually do recount for the whole city, you need to prove that irregularities happen and to prove irregularities. So that was something that we couldn't do. In the future period, we hope the prosecutor office, and we sent it to the designating prosecutor office per municipalities. At the same time, we always send the whole material for acknowledgement to the state prosecutor office. In the period that is in front of us, we will actually try to we will continue with our own investigation, because we have to sanction all polling station committee members if we prove that they didn't, for example, let observers in, if they didn't counted the ballots prior to the opening. But if we are talking about election fraud, if someone falsified the forms and the results on forms, and if someone falsified the signature in a voter register, that is definitely criminal act. So it will be parallel cases, and we will see how this will end. What I wanted to say for the end, which is really very disappointing, I mean, for the whole process, and the other colleagues mentioned as well, our elections definitely show up that instead of reducing the number of regularities per year, reducing the number of recount per year, reducing the number of sanction per year, everything is actually increasing instead of turnout. That actually, the turnout is the only that is slightly decreasing. And that is because I think the public opinion, thanks to disinformation, misinformation, fake news, is definitely ruined, and it has a great impact on the integrity of the whole process. And I think we will all agree something has to be repaired.
Thank you for your answer, and thank you as well for your last sentence. That is exactly my final question for all of the panelists. Very short question, because we are at the very end. I just want to know what do you think we need to change urgently in order to have more democratic and more free elections, which are the precondition for every democratic society. So please, let's just go in circle. We can start with you, Ms. Hadžiabdić. What do you think we need to urgently change in order to improve election process?
Well, I think that some of my colleagues will agree that is, for me, and I think for my colleagues in Central Election Commission, definitely the way how we appoint polling station committee members. If we cannot change the way how we appoint them, we have to change the way how we appoint the president, at least of the polling station committees, because they're working for the benefit of political parties. We need presidents of polling station committees who are able to actually absorb the complexity of voting and counting much prior, maybe to work with them in non-election year. If we continue like this, with ruined confidence and without new technologies, we will really go back to 1998, as I mentioned, when we had supervisors at every polling station. At that time, we had internationals. Now we can maybe find the domestic sources, but we have to find a way to control process if we don't have, to control process better if we do not have independent election administration.
Thank you. Maybe Lisa can be next.
Sure. I would say global collective pressure from the democracy community on social media and technology platforms to improve the transparency tools they make available and to make them available in all countries equally, and to standardize the content moderation practices and policies they have in place, again, to ensure that all countries are receiving equal treatment.
Thank you, Lisa. Ivana?
Well, apart from the issues related to polling station committees and the improvements to the legal framework regarding not only polling station committees, but local election commissions as well, in terms of their independence and selection, I have to say that we also need a very thorough reform in terms of prevention of abuse of state resources, either through the election law or the law on political party finance. And also when it comes to the legal framework, again, these provisions related to the behavior of political parties and candidates, so not only within the official campaign period, but also throughout the year, or at least after the announcement of the elections. There are, of course, other issues related to transparency of the election administration, especially local bodies, which is very hard. If you report any kind of violations, it is very hard to get any kind of feedback on the reports, and there is discrepancy in terms of how local election commissions actually decide on specific cases and specific reports. But I mean, there are so many things that I think that from the point of view of the election campaigns, of the behavior of political parties and narrowing possibilities of abuse, these are some of the priorities.
Thank you, Ivana. Dario, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think that receipt or the formula is universal. You need to have 4 things which we are partially or fully missing. So first one is the legislation, and we definitely need to upgrade it. It is not good, it is with malfunctioning. Second is independent institutions. Now the election process is completely in the hands of political parties. Up to 140,000 people, party people, are actually controlling it on the election day. Third is sanctions. We need to punish violations of law and procedures. Now, if you don't punish these behaviors, then you will always encourage more election frauds and more election irregularities to happen. And the last one is monitoring and recommendations. So election reform is never-ending process. It is continuous, permanent activity. We will now deal with certain irregularities, but some other issues will pump up. So the role of civil society in that is in raising these problems on the public level. And if you cannot ignore a problem anymore, if it is on public level and citizens are aware of it and everybody are aware of it, then you deal with the certain upgrades, recommendations, and similar. So we will have 40 of them, recommendations. Definitely as a country, we need to deal with the verdicts of the European Court for Human Rights and implement them in legislation. And this is more of political process. And second is the series of technical improvements which will actually prevent and stop election frauds, such as electronic voters list, some kind of the electronic tabulation of the results, complete reform of the polling station committee memberships and their education, complaints procedures, accreditation process, postal voting, and similar what I already mentioned before. So many things to do, but we hope that we will start to do on them, start to work on them.
Thank you, Dario. And at the end, Danira, what do you think?
Well, I can be, since you let me for the last person, all of the other people said pretty much everything I wanted to say. So maybe to conclude with, it would be really good if we got electronic voting, because people are not really trusting the current system, and that would be like the end thing that would contribute to people trusting more in this whole process of voting.
Thank you. And at the very end, I promise it is end now. We had just one question from our attendees. So Sana Hadžić is asking, how can we build a united progressive movement based on a civic engagement in our country, which could serve the Bosnian democracy and overcome nationalism? And in this way, how can technology be a good leverage to overcome the complex and political constraints in Bosnia in order to show citizens another path, another way for them to get involved in politics? It's not specified to whom the question is sent, so if anyone wants to answer, please.
Well, I can maybe start and somebody else can jump in. Well, it's really a pretty difficult question to answer. At least our organization is trying to do with various applications to mobilize and to inform citizens about how responsible the government is, as well as to involve them in several in activistic world in various ways. So we have certain segments within our projects that where we try to involve citizens in a way to help us explore certain topics, which also relate to nationalistic issues that are sensitive. Also, we're trying to ask questions we're making sure that citizens can ask questions to government, and we're trying to push and try to give information to citizens that they can exercise their rights to access to information, as well as to demand from the government to adjust documents that are of public importance in a way that it would be more understandable and accessible to the citizens. So in that sense, we're trying to switch this public discourse to the topics that are more important to citizens, and we're looking in a ways to work with public officials and with civil servants in a way to improve all of these segments. And I think that's kind of a way to fight nationalistic rhetoric, just to put all of these topics in a second plan, or how to say it, in a more unimportant plan. I don't have any other ideas on how to effectively use technology that I can think of now.
Yes, if no one else wants to say anything, I would just jump in and say that we can use technology in order to educate people. And I think that education is the key, especially in such complex political systems and societies in general. I think we urgently need a better and more aggressive, I would be free to say, education on various issues, but especially on political literacy, because we don't have opportunities to learn about these stuff in our country. And how to switch from the nationalistic topics, I would say, to push other questions in the public space, to ask for questions and to I'm missing the word, and to just to force politicians and the parties and the institutions to talk and do about the things that are important for the society, but not for the political parties. I will assume that is it, that no one else wants to add anything, since we don't have any more questions from our attendees. I would like to thank you all. Thank you for your time, for being here today. Thank you for the great discussion. And of course, thank you for the great job that you're doing. And let's just hope that next election process, we will have at least some positive changes so we can talk about them next time. And I also want to invite all of you to follow Point Conference and Zašto ne on social networks, because we are continuing with a series of discussions on different topics in the same format, and in the next couple of weeks another session, another topic, and another discussion will be held, and you are all very welcome to attend that one. Thank you all one more time.